Today, our first speaker is Suavi Aydın. He's from the sociology department of Hacettepe University. He completed his PhD at the anthropology department of the same university. He became an associate professor in 1998 and an anthropology lecturer in 2004. As most of you know, he has a significant number of published articles on nationalism, the question of identity, the left movement in Turkey, local history, history of settlement and movement and migration. His topic today is the ethnic demographic situation of Van and the region in the 19th century and tribal movements. I give the word to Suavi Aydın.
Thank you very much. Herkese merhaba.
Hello, everybody. After the morning session, we have to go a little back. And we are going to take a look at the local conditions that prepared the 20th century. We are going to go back to the 19th century. So, before the start of Ottoman reformism, the region of area was a geography where the local dynasties governed the area, and the local power structure was still continuing in Van. And the governors that were appointed to the central Van belonged to some local dynasties. But these governors had limited reign apart from their lands and their villages. Muş and Bitlis in the west were governed by autonomous base, and there were Garzan Yazidis in this area. So as we go towards Arda from the north of the lake, we can see that the Bayezid Pashas are starting to reign in that areas. To the east of the lake, in the plains of Abaga and Mahmudu, there were agriculturalists, both settled and nomads. In the east, there were other tribes such as Haydarans and Shikakis, the Kurdish tribes, and at the Hoshab, Mahmudi base reigned, and they were relatives of Hakkari Mirs. And Hakkari Mirship was in the south, and they reigned the whole Zap plain and the mountainous areas between Taurus mountains and Zagros mountains. And to the west of this mountainous area, there were the confederation of Artushi and Pinyanish, and there were the tribes of Harki and Oramar. Just to the east of Şemdinan area, in the south of Çölemerik, there were Nestorian villages, and most of the Nestorians here in that area were from tribes, and they played a role in the distinction between the right wing and the left wing. And to the west of the Zap spring, there were Kaldani Christians that represented the majority in those villages. This was a transition area for the tribes in the Botan Basin. So when we go up to the plains to the south of the lake, we saw the reign of Mukus and Bitlis Mirships. Cizre Botan was situated just in the south of this region, and there was also the Imadiye Mirship just in a part of the Zap Valley. There were Armenian villages as well in those areas that were quite suitable for agriculture. There were also some valleys that were quite suitable for agriculture, and in those areas there were some Assyrian and Armenian villages, and they collected taxes from those villages. This is why they were protected from the tribes, nomad tribes. They were protected from their oppression. And some of these villages were the properties of the Mirs and Beys in the east. In 1840s, there were three important factors that disturbed the traditional structure in this area. First of all, the Central Ottoman government started some military activities in order to reign in this area. They wanted to move the control towards themselves in Erzurum, Diyarbakir, and Mosul. The second one is the first Reformation arrangements and the fact that they disturbed the local people, the local Christian people in those areas. So when these reforms were put into implementation, the traditional power relations were disturbed. Therefore, in 1840, we can say that the Mirs in the region were quite merciful in their acts towards Christians. And the third one is that there were some missionary activities, and according to those activities, the power owners were afraid of losing their power because of these missionaries. So this skepticism and the resistance against this skepticism and Ottoman reformism represented itself in certain massacres against Assyrians. And Han Mahmud also played a role in these massacres. The Yazidi villagers were kicked out of their villages, and Han Mahmud's activities actually scared the Mush Pasha, and there were certain conflicts between these various beys. But the ally between Nurullah Mahmud and Bedir Han were shaped in a way that the Christians and Ottomans had to protect themselves against the central Ottomans. So the coastal area between Tatvan and Gevash was under the reign of Mukis owner Han Mahmud. According to the British Consulate Brand accounts, he says that Aktamar, the bishop of the monastery of Aktamar, complains about Han Mahmud stealing from them, plundering the place. And Han Mahmud and his brothers seized 100 villages. They carried out certain massacres there, and they expanded their fortunes. And he gathered certain dangerous men around him in order to resist against that power. Han Abdal, a brother of him, was living in Hoshab, and the other brother, Abdurazak Bey, resided in Ecemit. Their position gave them the opportunity to put Abaga Yazidis in Mahmudi plain and to benefit from the wide and abundant plains to the east of Van. So when we look at this situation, we can say that Han Mahmud took control of Van Sanjak, and because of his local power, the local beys either went under his reign, or they migrated from the area to the central Van, and they wanted to continue their power in those regions. Mahmudi beys were among them as well. There was this family that was called Timuzades in Van, and they didn't make it in Hoshab, and they moved to Van in order to make a living there. So these people, they were in cooperation with the central government, and they tried to protect their villages from these tribes. There was a movement that started in 1842 that ended in 1847, and with this movement, these mirships were collapsed and the dynasties were banished. So the whole region was left to the mercy of certain tribes in this area. Starting from 1850, Tanzimat rules, so reformation moves, were put into implementation in the region. So after a short period of peace and stability, the central government lost authority there. Mehmet Hurşit Pasha visited the whole region in 1850, and he witnessed the stability that was established by the government. In an Armenian village, there were some old people that offered prayers to him, and they said that before we were afraid of Muslim people when they visited the area, we were afraid of the persecution that they would inflict upon us, but now those who reign, they consider themselves as equals to us, so there's peace and stability, they say. So after this period, the tribe movements and plunders made the region unstable again, and the power authorities, they started to compete. So the production relationships and social structures started to change as well. So there were mountainous areas before and the plains. The area was made up of these mountains and plains, and the summer quarters, the yaylak possibilities, were used by those people in summer, and the villages that were in high plains were used as winter quarters, as kışlaks. So there was this transhuman circle for the nomads in agricultural villages. There were some people that worked in plains as well. They lived in plains between the valleys as well. So this, in order to better explain this economic social structure, we have to benefit from Wolf-Dieter Hütterod's concept, Yayla Bauern. Here is what he says about the concept. The plains of the villagers should not be far away from their villages. So when they go up to the plain, they carry out their work with their animals, and at the same time they have to be able to operate their agricultural work as well. So the Armenian and Assyrian villagers that have such kışlaks, they should not harm each other's economic activities. They should support each other in a symbiotic way. And the way to do that, the guarantee for that, was the authority of mirs. Mirs used to protect these agricultural villages, and they used to regulate the transhuman cycle between them, so they stopped them from conflicting with each other. A majority of them belonged to Armenians and Assyrians, so the Armenian labor was quite important in these areas that belonged to Muslim base. And there were some Armenian families that worked in the farms and irrigation channels that belonged to the Kurdish base. There were some Kurdish that did not belong to tribes, and they had certain farms as well. In the Mukus Valley, Çaplak and Nordiz valleys as well, there were certain plains which had such villages. In Hakkari valleys that leads to Zap Spring also had certain tribal societies as well. There were some Nestorians that belonged to tribes in the region of Hakkari. Tiari, Tahubi, Bazi, Dezi, Cilo, Culamak, and Bilican can be given as examples for this kind. Bilican, Culamak, and Şemdinlan tribes had some Kurdish and Nestorian members as well. In Kasava, there was a complicated, complex structure of population. The Turkish people in Van Erciyes and Adilcez were among those people. But starting from 1850s, the kışlak issue had changed. Before 1850s, these people that lived in kışlak were called as guests, but the villagers complained about them because sometimes they were involved in criminal activities and they caused damage for the villagers. But they were okay with paying some money to the villagers actually, because if they had kışlaks, they had to pay taxes to the pasha or mir in that region. This is why these villages, Haydaran villages, were an attraction center. So either they had to pay a kışlak money or saman money, hay money. So the local governors, they said that the kışlak tax should be removed. This is how the tribes would eventually be in peace. So when in 1850s the government authority relaxed and there was no local authorities that regulated the relationship between kışlaks and tribes, the movements that would hurt the tribes increased. So the tribes that came from Iran from Persia created a certain pressure, and there were a continuous conflict environment there, and Muradiye and Uzat was among those regions that had conflicts. So this region that had quite good possibilities of agriculture became a center of attraction for those people that came from Iran. Atmanki, Sepki, Haydaranlı, Celali tribes as well became parties of conflicts in this region. This is why in the period of Han Mahmud, their villages and their plains were invaded, but now the Han Mahmud's authority was removed and the tribes could move as they wished, and this is why it became an area of conflict. So the alliances in the region could change its nature in time. So Milan, Merzgi and Shkefti tribes in 1860s were in continuous conflict in this region. Shkefti and Mezgi, they tried to kick Milan out of this region, but they couldn't succeed, and these tribes were going to act against Shemski and Haydaran villages under the leadership of Milan in 1890s. So the tribes that carried out short distance plain activities were calmer, relatively calmer, but especially the ones that are long distance, that went to the Syria area, this area on the map, they caused certain Kışlak conflicts. And there were certain tribes that were linked to the Aytushi Confederation, and this big group moved from the mountainous area that is between Çöle Merik and Havasor Gevaş line towards Beytüşarap, Pervari and Şırnak. They ended at Cizre and Zaho, and then they moved to their Kışlak. So each migration period caused a lot of problems, and the state did not have any authority that would stop such problems. Between 1850s and 1819s, there was not a societal agreement or an authority that would stop such relations, that would establish such relations. But there were certain sheikh families that had a lot of authority. For example, Gayda sheikhs in Hizan, Nehri sheikhs in Şemdinan, and Arvasi sheikhs in Çatak succeeded in establishing a certain level of authority. So they removed the reigning order, Kadirilik, from the region, and they established the Naqshbandi order. I mean, they expanded that order. In 1890s, because of this disorder reached its peak levels, and Abdülhamit II came up with the following solution. They made these tribes Hamidians. They have become Hamidian troops. They became Hamidian troops, and their chiefs took certain titles, such as colonel, lieutenant of those regions. So the tribes were no longer under control, and they benefited from their Hamidian possibilities, and they benefited from their title, and they did not respect Nizamiye soldiers. The administrators said to Saadettin Pasha that the Kurdish challenged them by saying, "We are the lieutenants of the Hamidian troop, we are soldiers, so we are not under the command of kaymakams." This is what they say. So they said we ignore the orders of the state. So making them Hamidian changed the power ethos of those tribes. As Brent said, when the chief of the tribe died, the person that would take his place would be chosen by the elderly of the tribe. And the landlord of the tribe was limited, their duty was limited to administrating the tribe work. We can see these elderly as the chief of the elderly committee. So there was a sort of equality between the members of tribes. So in this sense, making these people Hamidian brought a certain hierarchy in those tribes, and the various titles that were delivered to them moved them from being primus inter pares to absolute leaders. We can say that there is no tribe that were not made Hamidian in the region. The government only abstained from making Yazidis Hamidian, so they acted as the armed power of the local authority, and the old Kışlaks became easy targets for the tribes. And they did not only content with the plains, they wanted to expand their power to the neighboring villages as well. So there were always conflicts between them. For the large plains between Haydaran, Çaldıran, and Özalp, Tekkuri and Milan tribes conflicted. And in the vicinity of Tendürek, they conflicted with Celali, Sepki, and Atman tribes. Merzgi tribe targeted Shemski, that Shikeftis and Shemskis in the same region. They already took control of Erciş and Edilcevaz, and they used Patnos as a center. The Christian villages were quite easy targets in this area, and the Abdülhamit II management, the government, did not meddle with the affairs of these tribes. As said by the Takuri landowner to Saadettin Pasha, we go to the Armenian villages, we cut their goats, we kill their chickens, we do whatever we want, and we don't pay any money. This is what he said. So the Armenians that were living in the rural area, they gathered in central Van, and they did not want to go back in spite of the guarantees that were given to them. So the British consulate advised that these Armenians would not be sent to anywhere. So when Saadettin Pasha carried out some official talks with the tribe landowners, Milan tribe chief only left when he was threatened by having gendarmerie in their villages. Timurhan was one of the Makuri chiefs, and he said, "We have been in this region for 1,300 years. When we came with Halid bin Velid, there were no Armenians here. We brought them here in order to have them work for us. Now, tell us, what can we do? Can we just do nothing against our workers?" This is what he said. So Saadettin Pasha runs into an Armenian group in the Timurzade Road, and they were working in the Timurzade dynasty's farm, and one of his servants kidnaps the wife of one of those Armenians, and the Armenian husband goes with his child to the British consulate. Saadettin Pasha has Timurzade ask about this issue, and Timuzade says in his letter that everybody can make use of their property as they want, and as I don't want these men in my area, I kick them out of my farm. This is how he responded. In the vicinity of Bashkala, there was a Hamidian troop made up of Artushi and Magizis. However, the officials of the local dynasty did not intervene when they did some illegal acts. And the Kaymakam in that region, the lieutenant in that region, could not establish authority over the Armenians there. And Erbak landowners had Shikeftis plunder the town center and villages in that region. In 1890, before 1890, Shikeftis went to control the Iran road, and this is how they survived. And in 1895, Artushi landowners went to the higher Zab Valley and plundered this area. At the end of the 19th century, the authority area of these tribes became stable in a way. The plains in the mountainous regions between Hakkari and Havasor are under control of these tribes that were under the Artushi Confederation. Artushis were in conflict with Tiari Nasurians in 1890s. However, Tiaris were quite powerful, and they plundered certain Kurdish villages up until Livin during these conflicts. And these incidents could only be stopped by government sending their troops in the region. So these tribes that had arms succeeded in protecting themselves against other tribes. They had certain problems with some larger tribes and the settled people there. So with Mustafa Pasha, the chief of Miran, and Doskis in Imadiye, they had certain problems. Another development started with 1895 and 96 incidents, and with that incident, they entered into a stable settlement. And they seized the Armenian villages in that region, and this triggered a long migration movement in the region. In 1915, the Armenian villages were emptied with the decision of deportations. Not only these tribes, but those tribes that actively played a role in the war also emptied. Burukis are one of the typical examples of this phenomenon. Burukis became the new settlers in the ancient Armenian villages at the most beautiful place of Van Plain. So after 1877-1878 Ottoman-Russian War, there were Kurdish people who settled between Mush and Barto, and there were certain Kurdish people who spoke Turkish as well that settled in between Kars and Ardahan. After the establishment of the Republic, the transhumance cycle in Syria and Iraq became more difficult, and the transhumans, the nomads and semi-nomad tribes had difficulties in continuing this transhumance movement. So after the Nestorians were forced out of this region, some Jukis that belonged to the same confederation came to the area. So there were some tribes that were marginalized and moved their kışlaks to the banks of the Dicle River. So those people who moved with tents up until 1960s suffered from the plain bans starting from 1980s, and the nomad culture in Turkey was destroyed with this movement.